So I guess to just try to understand the order of things here, um, how do you see this? Do you look to divine revelation first to inform the question of what's logically coherent? Or do you start with logic first and then determine what is divine revelation based off of that? So, like theoretically, if we were to establish that the Quran is true, is divine speech, it's is God's revelation. Let's say that we just have that absolutely established. But let's say the Quran teaches just very explicitly the Trinity, which obviously it doesn't, but let's just say that it does. At that point, you would either have to say, okay, well, I'm going to allow logic to say this isn't divine speech, or would you say, okay, this is divine speech, therefore that informs my logic? What's the order of things here?
In this specific case, it would be, and I'll just state it openly, if I believe that the Quran actually taught the doctrine of the Trinity, then I would not be a Muslim. I would say, okay, this is clearly false. Now, I don't want to make it seem like there's this thing which is logic, which is totally outside of scripture, and that's what's governing in it. No, I just think it's the way in which God created all of us. I'm not talking about any like complex thing. I'm talking about a basic way of thinking that things like contradictions are not really things. They don't exist. They're just completely gibberish, right? Like when we answer, sometimes atheists will think they're asking a clever question. Can God create a married bachelor, or can God create a square circle? We would just say it's not out of weakness that God can't create these things. They're not really things to begin with. It's just utter nonsense. So yeah, I think that this kind of simple way of thinking governs how we look, not only about divine scripture, just everything that we do in life. I mean, you wouldn't be able to really exist in a consistent way if you weren't actually thinking in proper categories. So yeah, I mean, there are many things, for example, that I've believed over the years. Not only, like, I'm not saying when I was Catholic or anything, I'm saying even as a Muslim, there are many things that I believed that I realized, oh, this can't be true because it doesn't make any sense. And so I had to reevaluate my own positions. So yeah, I would say that it does govern whether or not we accept the scripture. And I just think that that's just the way it is.
I got you.
Sure.
Samuel, did you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on that because that's been a key part of our discussion today. I don't see that it's reason judging scripture or particularly scripture judging reason. I actually think that the two go together and circle around, and that what actually happens is that we'll all have some type of understanding of the universe. I mean, if you go to places without scripture where they believe in magic, that makes perfect sense to them. Right, the magic makes sense to them. You get to animist societies, and their societies, that makes sense. But then, as your mind gets informed by scripture and other things, it's a circular process. One builds upon another, and as I learn about God, the Creator, I stop with the magic. Once I learn about, God as the sustainer of life, my understanding of the universe starts to change, and so. And so I approach creation not as I don't see creation as a living thing. I see it as something created by God that can be studied, that is rational, that can looked at. Now, not all cultures do that, right? Not all cultures do that. You go to animistic cultures, they don't think that way. But it's scriptures that has informed our cultures to think a certain way. And so they build on each other. And so that's how I see the two playing together. It's not sort of one or the other, one judging the other. It's one informing the other. And I would say, as iron sharpens iron, they work together. But I would want to say that, for some things about God, without scripture, you can't know. I think from reason, we can say God is there. From reason, we can say, that God has a different nature to us, that the universe started. And so there's this personal aspect to God to give a choice to start the universe. We can say some things, but if you want to know God personally, if you want to know God as a person, you have to have revelation. You have to have revelation. And what I tried to do in my presentation was to show a coherent picture from Scripture as to how God is described. And, I pointed out that God is different to us. Divine beings have a different spatial existence. And so I don't see the Trinity as, incoherent for those reasons. And that's my epistemology anyway.
And I guess as just a follow-up, Samuel, I think I understand, Jake, where you're coming in on this point, but just to clarify, Samuel. So, I mean, it seems like there has to be some kind of tiebreaker at the end of the day, right? Let's just say hypothetically, if one book in the Bible clearly said 2 + 2 = 5, it seems like you would have to say, well, the tiebreaker here would be our rationality, our logic, and we would have to say that book doesn't belong as divine, in the category of divine speech. Or would we say, no, this is divine speech, therefore we need to rework our understanding of mathematics and logic?
If I saw 2 + 2 = 5, and I mean, in one sense, you've given an example which I don't think exists in the Bible.
I understand.
Right? So if there was an example like that, so I'll give you another example. If it said that, well, I'll take that one, 2 + 2 = 5. If it said that, I guess I would say, no, I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So logic would be the tiebreaker.
Logic would be the tiebreaker. But again, it's an example that doesn't exist.
I understand. Right? I'm just talking theoretically, just so that I understand where y'all are both coming from as far as the priority and order and tiebreakers here.
Yeah. But look, I'll give an example where it does come about. The Bible speaks about a real Adam. And how that fits into modern science and everything is a question for Christians. And so, that would be a real example where, I would want to affirm a real Adam. And I would say, how does that fit in with other things? Well, then there are going to be different answers that people give to bring that up. But I'm going to hold on to the real Adam.
Okay, fair. Yeah. Now, Jake, it seems like what you were saying is ultimately the tiebreaker here would be logic and rationality, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, in that sense. But I would also agree with Samuel. I mean, from my perspective, I don't believe that the Quran contradicts itself, right? I don't believe that there are actually logically contradictory things in it. There may be certain things that are difficult to understand, that I would grant. But if I became convinced, I would use the same example. If the Quran said 2 + 2 = 5, I would be like, this doesn't make sense. This is a strange book. So by that same standard, I'm basically doing the same thing with the Bible, and I'm not using different scales. I'm doing the same thing. Doing the same thing with the Quran. For example, there are Muslims who believe certain things that I think are ridiculous, and I don't think that they are coherent. And I use my general basic framework to reject some of those ideas. So, yeah, I do this consistently, no matter really what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, if you enjoyed that video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the like button, and also consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/Reason and Theology.